The power of telling our stories and sharing our truth. Hey, it's Heather Chauvin, wife, mother of 3 boys, former social worker, breadwinner, recovering hustler, and stage 4 cancer survivor. I'm not a fan of that term, by the way. Beyond all of these titles and labels, I'm a human being, just like you, attempting to navigate it all while feeling good. My goal on this podcast is to show you that you can live an energized, sustainable life both at home and in your work. It doesn't matter if you stay at home full-time, if you work from home, you're a CEO, a successful business owner, or trying to find some inspiration. On this show, I attempt to keep it real with stories, interviews, and random thoughts. This is not a business or career podcast, and it's not parenting podcast. It's both and so much more. You will laugh. You may even cry. And you may even get a little frustrated with the truth you've been hiding from yourself. I believe all human behavior is a language, whether it's through your child's behavior, your health, or a relationship. And when we learn to listen instead of react, we begin to understand what it truly means to feel alive and in control. It's time to put your big girl pants on and find your brave. Let's go. All right, ladies, I'm really excited to share today's podcast episode with you. It is an interview that I did with a colleague, a client, a dear friend, Jessi Shuraleff. Jessi is the founder, she's the mama of 2 amazing humans that were conceived through IVF. She's the podcast host of This Is My Truth. Her mission is to create community and connection through sharing personal stories. She says, as a fertility warrior, she spent many years shoving down her emotions around her fertility journey in a box and threw away the key. Until she found the key. And it was in that sharing she found community and connection like she never experienced it before. This Is My Truth is her way of paying it forward to all those on their own journey. You can find her on the podcast, This Is My Truth, at iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more. You can also find Jessi on Instagram at This Is My Truth podcast. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm really excited for you to get to know Jessi. She is one of the sweetest humans I know, and she's worked with me for a while, and this is a perfect example of why sharing our stories and our truth is so, so important in the world, and that is kind of what she's dedicated her mission to right now, just giving space to other women to do the same, women and men to do the same. And, you know, through working with Jessi, getting to know Jessi, what I've really loved and valued about her is her courage to put herself out there and to push through the perfectionism and enter that messy middle. Because too often when we are on this journey of, okay, what does this mean? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? We don't know, right? The path is not necessarily clear. We just know we need to do the next right thing in front of us. And as we grow, so does our stories. And so does our truth. But when we let it out and we voice it, we create connection. And this is where the magic happens. Every single time I podcast, I am sharing my truth and I'm sharing a story, and people get to know, like, and trust you. And this is not necessarily about building a business, but also just feeling better in your own body and mind. So I'm really, really excited for you to meet Jessi today, and go follow her on Instagram, send her a DM, and subscribe to her podcast. This Is My Truth. Hello, Miss Jessi.
Hi, Heather. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to be here. Have you been preparing for this moment your whole life?
My entire life. This is it, the pinnacle.
This is the moment, when you become a guest on the Mamas in Control podcast.
Yes.
It's been quite the journey to get to this moment. And for those who don't know you, they've obviously heard the beautiful introduction that I've created for you. But there's a reason why I wanted to interview you today and have this conversation. I want to talk a little bit about your podcast, which is called This Is My Truth.
Yep.
And it's also interesting to me how the more not that vulnerability is trending, but I've been having this conversation a lot with Wyndham, who's helping me write my book. And I'm saying, why is it groundbreaking for women to just speak their truth? And I want to dive more into that conversation because too often we're judging outsides, right? People's outsides saying, oh, look, it looks like they have everything together, but there's a lot going on the inside. And I think that's where we need to start. So welcome.
I am so excited to have this conversation because there is so much truth in what you just said, especially for women and the mask that we put on and the armor that we carry. And I am living proof of just how much armor it takes. But now looking back on the other side of where I am, and this is the journey, right? I'm not, quote unquote, cured of not wearing a mask or not having armor, but I have found that in taking off pieces of your mask, of sharing a little bit of your truth, of opening yourself up a little bit to vulnerability, the other side of that is true connection and authentic connection. And in a world where there is a lack of empathy, or I believe that there is a lack of empathy, I think that it is so important to be able to have those true connections. And to me, that is the common thread. You cannot have an authentic connection with somebody if you're not willing to be vulnerable.
Awesome. Okay. So when I hear you say you cannot have an authentic connection with somebody unless you're willing to be vulnerable, I automatically go to our children.
Yep.
Because a lot of people listen to this podcast because they're a mom and they feel out of control, right? So
yes.
they're feeling that. And, I will say, what do you want? And they say connection. And yet sometimes we're seeking that on the outside. They think if I just spend more time with my children, if I spend more time with my partner, if I just do all of these things for everybody else, then that connection will come. But that's not why you created the podcast. So I would love if you could give us a nutshell version of what led you to sharing the podcast and sharing stories from other women and men on This Is My Truth.
Yeah. And I think that, one of our first conversations that we had, I think I said to you the same thing, like I'm craving connection, and I didn't actually know what that meant. And now being on the other side of many of these conversations, I was looking for connection with myself. And for so long, I lived my life defined by labels. So I've spent the last 13 years of my career at Google. So I was a Googler. Then I got married. So I was a wife. Then I had children, and that was a journey to even become a mom. And so I was someone who struggled with infertility, and then I became a mom, and I was a mom, and I lived my life defined by those labels. I forgot who I was, and I lost so much of that connection that I had with myself. And I've shared this with you in the past, but one of our first conversations, I remember saying to you, I just want to feel again. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I had gone numb. And what I have found in my journey is that part of that numbness was around my struggle to start a family. And I had a lot of shame tied to that experience, in that for me, I'm not particularly religious, but I felt that my body wasn't doing what it was meant to do as a woman. And so I defined myself by that inability to conceive naturally. And when we finally did get pregnant through IVF, with my first pregnancy, we found out we were having twins, and I was elated, scared shitless. Ooh, can I curse? Sorry. You can bleep that out.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? Have you listened to my podcast before? That's the only hate mail I get. They're like, I know. We always need to preface that though. We're like, oh fuck. Can I say fuck? Shit. Oh crap. Go for it. Be you.
I mean, I know you curse, but I curse a lot too. I'm just being my true self. I'm from New York, so it's in the water there. But so I found out that I was having twins, and as I progressed in my pregnancy, we found out that my son was sick, and we ultimately had to make a medical decision, and it was just heartbreaking. And again, the way that I lived my life at that time was I would just shove emotions down. I wouldn't deal with it. So we had to make a decision in order to save my daughter's life and my life. And I was back at work less than 72 hours later. And I just soldiered on because that's what I did. And that's what I was taught to do.
Wait a minute. I didn't know that part.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. 3 days later.
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I never dealt with it. And it wasn't until I saw my two daughters. So I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old right now. And my oldest is a mirror. The best way to describe her is she's a mirror of me. And so when she started to, quote unquote, rebel or act out or have big emotions, I didn't want her to shove things down. I wanted her to feel those emotions, but I recognized that I wasn't doing it myself. And so that started me on this journey where I had to deal with my infertility. I had to deal with the loss of my son, who his name is Clark. And I started to share my story. And what was so interesting in the ability to share my story was that so many people, women and men, told me too. And not all of their stories had to do with infertility. There was just common connections, whether that was the feeling of shame or the feeling of shoving emotions down and not dealing with them. But it was my aha moment where how many of us are walking around and putting on this fake front because we feel like we have to. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to create a platform, and I called it This Is My Truth, because for me, that this is my truth, right? We all have truths that we don't want the world to see, but my mission is to create connection and community through sharing personal stories. Because when I started to share my story, I was gifted with amazing connections and community. And so my podcast is a way to pay it forward for others.
I love this. I remember the first time you shared your story. A little moment. Yeah. Let's talk about what's coming up for me is the disconnect that, because I know you're a Brené Brown fan. She talks a lot about, vulnerability and shame and all of that. And I think she's a catalyst in the movement of really helping, my chair is so squeaky. I really need to deal with this. Can you hear that?
I can.
Oh my God. It's my husband's like, this is the worst chair ever. And I just won't give it up because it was my grandfather's chair, but it's so fucking squeaky. Not good for podcasting. Anyways, where the fuck was I? Okay. Brené Brown. I'm like, he must be trying to get my attention or something. It's overly squeaky. Brené Brown, shame. vulnerability. Her work has really brought it into like modern day practicality, right? But I feel like, and I'm curious your experience between reading and the actual doing. Can you explain that journey? Because I know you didn't just tell your story and then the next day you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start a podcast. So what has that journey been like for you to really be able to feel again, to expose your truth, and then also feel, I don't want to say confident, because I don't know if people actually feel confident before they take action, to create the community for others to do the same?
So I think what you're speaking about in terms of there's a difference between reading and then taking action is so true. So I just, over the holidays this year, I actually reread several of Brene Brown's books for the third time. And maybe the third time's a charm, but I finally understood what she was talking about. But I think it's because I've spent the last year and a half taking action. And so the first time I read, Daring Greatly or The Gifts of Imperfection or Rising Strong, I was intrigued by it, but I didn't do anything. I mean, I even remember rereading Gifts of Imperfection the second time, and she has like tangible things that you can do. And I was like, yeah, this is nice, but I don't need this. And so for me, I go back to what I said earlier on, I lived my life by labels and I defined my life by labels. And let's use me being a Google employee, a Googler. I defined my life by how I climbed the corporate ladder. That's how I defined success. But the reality is now, looking back on it, I have the wherewithal to say, is that what truly matters? Is climbing the corporate ladder what I want? Is getting that next level at Google really what I'm craving, what I'm desiring? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it may not be. And so I think for me, it was about connecting with who I am and who I want to be, and then asking myself really hard questions. Am I the mom that I want to be? Am I the wife that I want to be? Am I the person that I want to be? And that last question is something that I constantly have to ask myself and take, to use your own words, Heather, which how often do people like spit back your own advice to you? But, it took taking messy action. It took having really uncomfortable conversations with myself. It took, journaling and, meditating and doing some mindfulness and doing things that, felt really uncomfortable. So a good example of that is I have a challenge for myself that I want to be challenged every day. And
Ooh,
part
I
of
like
this
that.
part of this actually comes from your advice, Heather, on, what's your core desired feeling? And for me, it was strong. And in my mind, when I wrote that down the first time, I was like, oh, well, it just means I'm going to work out every day, which I am not one who loves to work out. Let's be really honest. But what I later found was I want to challenge myself, and that could be mentally, that could be emotionally, and that could be physically. And maybe it's all three in one day, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's, can I send an email to my senior vice president asking to be on an interview panel for, my future director, so that I feel like I had a say in the process. Old me would have never done that, but it was important to me. And the worst that he could have said was no, which is ultimately what he said. But I at least put myself out there and let it be known that I had an opinion. And so just little things like that. Really another challenge that I sort of allowed myself was both my daughters are very opinionated, and I just, something simple like them choosing out their own outfits and not being perfectly matched. If you ever see my kids on my Instagram, like their outfits are just their own. And to me, that was a challenge of being comfortable with how others were going to perceive me as a parent and my children. But little actions like that really led me to being able to feel confidence in myself and knowing who I am so that I could share my story and then ultimately create a platform for others to share theirs.
It's so interesting how you develop one muscle in one area of your life affects every other area of your life. And I would love to talk about failing fast. I actually do not resonate with the term failure at all, but I think just bringing up what you just spoke about, which was asking, knowing that the response might be no, allows you to speak up in other areas of your life. But something that you just said triggered a different conversation, and I'll just make a side note, which is very interesting to me how parents of girls or children who identify as girls and wear quote unquote gendered clothing like dresses or whatever that is, the matchingness compared to boy moms. My boys, I'm like, you're wearing underwear and like you're going outside, like put a shirt on, put some shorts on. So interesting to me how we raise female and male gender children and the clothing aspect and the perfectionism that comes out.
I mean, you and I could have a whole conversation on this. I feel I have lots of feelings around it, but ultimately, I think for me, looking at my two girls, they're going to have so much societal and cultural pressure to be certain ways. And so I view my role as really just allowing them to understand who they are and advocate for that. So, there's a line in Untamed, and I'm not going to be able to remember the exact line, but the concept is around bravery. And Glennon Doyle Milton gives the example of her two daughters going in to get their ears pierced. And I believe it was her youngest was like totally gung-ho, wanted to do it, immediately ran up, and her oldest, who had wanted to go, started to hesitate. And the ear piercer, looked at her oldest daughter and said, "Why aren't you brave? Like, why can't you be brave like your sister?" or something like that. And it struck Glennon that like our definition as a society around brave is succumbing to other people's pressure, and how she then had a conversation with her daughter around what you actually did was brave because you listened to yourself. And I loved that. And I think about that actually almost daily since I've read it, because there is I see it, I saw it even just yesterday with watching my kids play with our neighbors' kids. There is just so much pressure to be a certain way. And I want to be able to see my kids for who they are, because truly, I believe that as humans, we just want to be seen and heard for who we are. Yeah. And I think we do that to tie it sort of back into my platform. You do that by being authentic. You do that by authentically listening to people, by seeing them for really who they are and not for who you want them to be. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. But I think that if we can allow ourselves to understand and see people from their perspective, hear their stories, and you might not agree with their opinions or their perspectives, and that's okay. But to be able to accept them for who they are in that moment and have them accept you, like there's magic there.
Yeah, you can learn a lot about humanity and our children, especially when we stop and listen instead of project our stories and beliefs and values. And, as you were telling the story, I'm reflecting on some of the ways that I parent. And part of it is just wanting to protect my children from the world, because the undoing is so large, so large, and I watch my boys constantly, like they'll get an email from the teacher saying like, this wasn't good enough. And then I hear, I'm not good enough. And I'm like, no, that's not what's happening here. And it's a chronic unlearning and undoing. And then yet managing that story that's first coming, which is, oh gosh, like, why aren't you trying harder? Why aren't you doing this? Like, okay, calming down that story and then being like, no, this is a learning opportunity. So there is a lot of pressure. And I feel like when we become aware of that pressure and that the energy of the pressure, we can choose to pick it or not. And it's kind of like, and then you become like this black sheep, right, of the culture, where you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, yeah, her clothes are mixed matched. Like, she is who she is. Like, let it be, right? And we're shifting into that. Have you noticed how? Okay, this is one thing that I've been challenged with, and a lot of women who work with me are challenged with when they start living on their own terms. Have you noticed, like, in groups where like, I don't fit in here, or like cultural mainstream groups, and how you're navigating that?
Yes. And I think that was actually one of my big concerns when I started this path, right? Was I have amazing friends that I've been friends with since we were 10, 11 years old. I have an amazing group of friends from college, from all different aspects of my life. And I was really scared that my relationships would change as I changed, and that I may not be accepted anymore. And the reality is that's true. But I think about, that used to scare me. And I'm not sitting here saying that like it still doesn't bug me sometimes when I go outside and I am, talking to other parents on my block, and I'm like, gosh, I'm not clicking with these people anymore. But for me, it's a big step forward that I'm acknowledging that I'm recognizing it, and also saying like, it's okay. Like we are not at the same point. And I can respect where they are, and whether they respect where I am or not, it doesn't matter, because I'm comfortable with it. And I think as a parent, it's, candidly, it's been hard for me to navigate that, because I can then see how that plays out with my kids. And to your earlier point, like, yes, like I just want to protect the girls from, like if I could wrap them in a bubble, I would, but I know that's not life. And I don't want them to experience life in a way where they're not feeling right. And my parents are amazing, and they have done so much, but they spent so much of their time protecting me and my sisters that was one of the reasons why I shoved emotions down, because I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't know how to, find my voice and speak my voice and stand up for myself. And so while it does go against like every bone in my body when I see the girls, being in a situation where their feelings might get hurt, or, maybe they'll fall if they're doing something that's, maybe out of their comfort zone. But so like, there is that like visceral, like, oh, like I just want to go protect them. Mm-hmm. But what I have learned, and can't like still learning, I'm not perfect at this, is that when I have confidence in myself and I'm teaching the girls to have confidence in them, it is so freaking amazing to see what you can accomplish, because it's so much more than I ever thought I could. My husband said to me the other day, we were in a couples therapy session, and he said to our therapist, like, Jessi has put her mind to everything that she does. And she started this podcast, and like, threw it out there as an idea and then started it. And it's now become this platform that people are reaching out to her to want to be on. And, if you had said to me, even 2.5 years ago that I was going to have a podcast where I was speaking my truth and I was allowing others to speak theirs, that wouldn't have even been like an option, because I don't even think I would have allowed myself to dream that. And so this is a very long-winded way of saying, like, yes, I was very scared of this idea of finding myself as the black sheep in society. But what I've learned is that there are other like-minded people out there. And while they might not be while they might not be your next door neighbor, find your people, find your tribe, because they are everything. And that is one of the reasons why I've created this community with a podcast, because it's so important to have a safe space where you can start to peel off your mask a little bit and be yourself and have your truth, because it's a relief in a lot of ways.
The interesting part to me, one, I'm so incredibly proud of you. I mean, I'm just over here smiling. You can't see me, but I'm smiling.
Thank you.
But even in that, I always love to not debate people, but like challenge their beliefs around this, where, they'll say, I'm so scared. Like I'm going to put myself out there, and I don't even mean in a way where you're creating a podcast. I mean, when you're just taking a stand or using your voice in your home, right? Or you're just choosing to say, hey, this doesn't feel right. But on the other side of that is freedom. It is who we are. And when we become the person that deep down we know we are, and that is a journey. It's not like a weekend intensive. That journey, you find that freedom. And yes, you may be afraid of judgment still, as I feel like as humans, we're constantly managing the fear of whatever. But as you begin to speak your truth, as you begin to step into that, yes, things fall away and new people come. I don't know. It's just this weird thing to me, because like you were mentioning around the whole, people saying, oh my gosh, I'm there too. Me too. You're giving other people permission to speak their truth. And it's the courage of stepping into that. And I find it so interesting to me, like, as I'm talking to people and they give me like this weird eye, like, what do you do? Where do you, like, how, why? And I'm over that now. I'm like, just one day you'll have your aha moment and you'll be like, enough is enough. I'm done, being a sheep. I'm done following the crowd. I just want to be me. I want to feel good. I'm done, over analyzing everything. And yeah, I don't know where I'm getting with this statement, but I just mean it. Okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is, people say it's hard, right? I have a weird relationship with hard. I'm like, the action is not hard. The feeling is uncomfortable. It's actually the emotion that we're finding hard to feel. But the more you feel your feelings, you're like, oh, this is just uncomfortable. Okay. It's uncomfortable. It's hard to stay in the shitty situation. Correct? Right?
Yes.
But, and it's comfortable and hard to go through it. Uncomfortable and hard to go through it. So either way, there is some discomfort. So why not take the path towards freedom? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Curious your feedback. Feed forward. Yeah. Curiosity, your thoughts.
I mean, I hear you. And I think that if I put myself in the shoes of where I was 1.5 years ago to where I am now, I would look at that person and say, or that version of me, still me, that version of me, and say, you are scared, but you've also been going through the motions for the last 6 years. And in order to get to the other side, you are going to have to get uncomfortable. And that will be hard, but you can do hard things. You've proven that you can do hard things. You have gone through infertility. You have lost your son. You have, made your way up the corporate ladder in a for lack of a better word, like male dominated industry. And so you can do hard things. I think that even if I was standing in front of myself, I would still have this like acknowledgement of I can do all of those things, but it's just, I don't know how else to describe it other than it's that leap of faith. And I think some people are ready and willing to take it and some people aren't. And that's hard because you don't see the freedom, you don't see the empowerment right away. And even when you do, you're going to feel it and then you're going to have resistance and you're going to like be back at square one or maybe like square 1A. And to your earlier point, right, this is not you go to like a yoga retreat for 48 hours and you're cured. Like this is a constant daily practice where you are retraining your brain and unlearning so many things and retraining your brain to think in a different way. And so it's funny, like, I think we've talked about this. Like there are so many times when I want to like talk to a friend and just like shake them and be like, there is a different way. It doesn't need to be hard. Like your life does not need to be hard, but not everyone is willing to accept that, or able to accept that. And I struggle with this, but I'm learning to recognize where people are and just be okay with that. Whereas in my previous version of me, I would have tried my hardest to like, quote unquote, fix that person, even though they might not have known anything was wrong.
Okay. I love this. I feel like you and I could talk forever. So I'm going to wrap it up, but just based off of something that you just said, because I can feel that too. And I've definitely gotten better. It's almost like when you have a taste of the freedom because you've chosen this path and people are like, right. Like you said, I'm struggling. You're like, there is another way. There is another way. And so much energy. I see this all over the place. And then when people are in that state of not owning or taking that path and they feel so out of control and they're just trying to control people around them and the blame game and all of that. But redirecting our energy and attention on what is my truth? Who am I? Focusing on yourself, bettering yourself. It's like people will naturally gravitate to that or they'll run away from it, right? So we don't have to put so much energy and dedication into shaking everybody. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But I'm curious your perspective. So when you say, this is my truth, is it the truth of today? What if my truth is that my life feels chronically hard and overwhelming every single day of my life? And maybe you and I have a conversation and you're looking at me. I'm sure the roles, if you did that, you'd be like, Heather, what would you tell me? But,
yes, probably.
If you knew I was getting in my own way and I was just not willing to see that, not willing to hear it, I just wanted to sit in my shit. And I wanted to sit in my shit for a decade. Like I was unwilling. At what point, like, is that really my truth or is the truth? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
I do. And I mean, Heather, you and I could talk about this honestly for forever because the reality is you create your reality. Anyone is able to pick and choose facts that are going to back up their story, their truth. And I think about my platform as a way for people to share their truth. And I believe it's your truth in that moment. But so that person sitting there and for 10 years in their own shit, like to them, that is their truth. Does it need to be their truth? Hell no. But for them in that moment, they have I don't want to say created, but they have picked all the facts that they have found via the internet, via their friends, via society telling them that this is the way that life should be. And they have an entire laundry list of things to point to, right? Like if I were to sit there and say like, I hear you, that's so hard. Here's what I have learned. but then they would point to sort of like their laundry list of things that are going to back them up. To them, that is their truth. Mm-hmm. And what I would say to that person is, I get it. I was you in so many ways. And what I have learned, which is hard and it's not easy, is that it doesn't have to be this way. And your truth is whatever you make it. And so what do you want your truth to be, and fight for it?
That's a quotable. What do you want your truth to be, and fight for it? I think we should leave it there. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that it's true though. And whether we want to recognize it or not, that's a hard lesson to learn. But what I can tell anybody who is sitting, listening to this, and maybe your message resonates, maybe you've experienced something similar to me. Like, it's hard, it's not easy, but when you can recognize what your true desires are, what your true truth is, like, fight like hell for that, because there is such a feeling of empowerment, of freedom, of just general happiness, which I know that sounds so cliche, but it's so worth it. It'll be hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah. And the fighting part is, you have to be wildly intentional. I'm always like, how good can it get? How good can it get? And the little rebel inside of me is like, you don't think I can be, wildly abundant and energized? I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. I'm always thinking this or something better. Like, how good can it get? And what a way better perspective to have than how much shittier is this going to be?
Yeah.
So where can people find you? What are you up to if they want to learn more about Jessi?
Yeah. So you can find me on my podcast, This Is My Truth. It's available on Apple Podcasts or Google. What is Google calling it now? Google Podcast, Spotify, any of it. We like to rebrand. I
didn't even know that. I thought it was called Google Play. No,
they rebranded to Google Podcasts recently.
I don't even know this.
I don't know. iTunes is now Apple Podcasts, so apparently it's a thing to do. So, and any of the major podcast platforms. You can also follow me on Instagram at This Is My Truth Podcast, or reach me on my website, www.Jessi that's SHURALEFF.com. And on the website, I have some additional stories that I share about myself and other people's stories that are on the podcast as well.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jessi. We will have all of those links in the show notes. And this was such a fun conversation to have. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Hey, Mom is in Control listeners. It's Sarah.
And me, Sasha.
And we are the co-hosts of the podcast Dear White Women, which is a show that eases you into uncomfortable conversations about racism. So we know anti-racist work is at the top of mind for everyone right now, and we really believe that anti-racist work is not a moment, it's not a thing that we're doing right now, it's a lifestyle. And so for us, we're making our work concrete, practical, and accessible for the long haul. And Heather invited us to come on her podcast to share just one of the resources we're committed to, which is our monthly virtual book club. So we've started a Patreon, and if you head over to our podcast website, dearwhitewomen.com, we would love for you to join us. The book club starts in August, so you'll have time to grab the book and start reading if you join us now. Thanks again.